Cyberpunk is a subgenre of science fiction that originated with the new wave sci-fi movement of the 60s and 70s. It would be founded as a response to the idealistic portrayals of futurism, which defined the genre of science fiction previously. Futurism envisioned utopian societies built with humanity living in harmony with technology, one that embraced a world devoid of conflict. Cyberpunk would be born out of the disillusionment towards such idealism, reflecting the socio-political turmoil of the 60s and beyond. With mounting uncertainty regarding what the future holds, authors would begin to craft stories within futuristic settings that properly emphasize the logical endpoint to the failings of society in the present. Philip K. Dick's Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep is commonly attributed as the primary work to popularize the genre, later being adapted into a little indie film that you might know, directed by that one guy who did Alien a few years prior. Since then, cyberpunk has gone on to replace futurism in the cultural zeitgeist, becoming the leading characterization of the eventuality of society. I mean, we see cyberpunk everywhere nowadays. TV shows, films, video games, and a truck that looks like unrendered PS2 assets from Grand Theft Auto Vice City. What began as a cautionary reflection of the times then turned to the acceptance of what lies ahead. Instead of addressing the unsubtle themes of how late-stage capitalism would further distance humanity from harmony, modern iterations have only taken aesthetics and then really focusing on themes of just how cool consumerism is. Thank you, dear customer, for buying a game that barely works at launch and spending $70 on it. And while we have you, why don't you look at some of our other products, like Funko Pops, or action figures, or gaming chairs, and even your very own pair of cyberpunk shoes. Isn't capitalism like the coolest? I mean, we have Keanu Reeves, so obviously it must be cool. Anyway, today we're going to talk about Hard Boiled, one of the comics that stays true to the heart of cyberpunk and would go on to influence all of the modern depictions of the genre going forward. But before we get into that, let's hear a word from our sponsors. I want to extend a sincere thank you to Forensic and all of my supporters over on Patreon. If you want these videos early, consider becoming a member for as low as $1 per month. And if you want this pretty nifty Motherbox shirt or any of the other designs that I created, consider going to the new merch site. All of the links will be listed down in the description. And now, back to the show. As stated previously, cyberpunk rose to prominence in the late 60s and early 70s, serving as a rebuttal to the idealistic portrayals of futurism. The term would be coined by Bruce Bethke for his 1983 short story of the same name. Cyberpunk derives from the Greek word cybernetic, meaning skilled in steering or governing, and punk, well, that's kind of self-explanatory. Punk music would take rise in the 1970s as a countercultural sentiment, embodying anti-establishment messages and being defined by embracing an unrefined and garish sound to rebel in opposition to the status quo. Cyberpunk would incorporate aspects of futurism by way of the technological advancements for society, but instead of wielding technology to further society, humanity would adopt augmentations to become one with technology. This departure would be a symptom of the wider thematic elements, one that visualizes an over-reliance on foreign objects to evolve instead of ascending by way of societal betterment. Over time, cyberpunk would be defined as being high-tech and low lives, encapsulating the tropes of the protagonist to be an underdog slimeball who takes on the dominating class of the capitalist elites. This dichotomy would be best attributable to the incorporation of economic hierarchy, with the impoverished living in the shadows of the ruling class, subjected to the wake of corporate greed. In Blade Runner, the film takes on the aesthetics of a traditional noir, supplanting the traditional protagonist into the hyper-reality setting. This is a feature, not a bug. This approach allows for the audience to gain their footing on the inner workings of the elevated setting, but remains approachable through the lens of using the point of view as a grounded ride-along. And now's about the time that people are going to go down to the comments and tell me, Kirby, I learned about Blade Runner being influenced by Mobius in the recent Matt with 4Ts video, and allow me to respond. I'm getting there. Will you give me a second? So yes, the visual identity of cyberpunk is commonly attributed back to Mobius, as his work would influence the films that further define the genre and would really be the Rosetta Stone for all artists that are conceptualizing within the genre going forward. But I'm obviously not Matt with 4Ts, and I'm really trying to keep on to the hair that's been receding since I was in middle school, and Matt is a bald king, so I'm not going to reheat his nachos. Instead, I want to talk about this cult classic comic that was influenced by Mobius and dissect how this seemingly insignificant story could be at the foundation of cyberpunk and the modern depictions thereof. Hardboiled is a 3-issue comic series from Dark Horse, written by Frank Miller and illustrated by Geof Darrow, published between 1990 and 1992. You might have alarms raised at the series coming out over the span of 3 years and it only being 3 issues. And you'd be right, the series, much like its creators, was highly irregular, and the story would be impacted by that as a result. Hardboiled would be the first instance of Geof Darrow working with a writer, as well as following the format of a comic script. Before meeting Frank Miller, Darrow was a rising star in European comics, with his work taking primary inspiration from the work of Mobius. The two would collaborate on the book City of Fire, with Darrow doing the pencils and Mobius inking his line work. The two would go on to develop a friendship, with Darrow now becoming peers with one of his primary inspirations for illustrating. Mobius would introduce him to Frank Miller, with Darrow later talking about how nervous he was during this interaction, because realistically, Frank Miller was a writer/artist that defined American comics for that era. Frank asked what kind of story that Geof would want to work on, with him replying, "It has to be action-packed." Frank Miller would then develop the core aspects of the story, and sending off the first script for issue 1, amounting to around 10 pages. The reason that the page count is so low is because he was giving the opportunity for Darrow to explore all of the potential avenues for exploration through his pencils. And that becomes abundantly apparent as soon as you start issue 1. Darrow says that he wanted to take this as an opportunity to impress Frank, obviously being one of his heroes, so he expanded on the premise and wanted to make it the best representation of himself, as well as making sure that he was invested in the story. Darrow spoke about his approach to visualizing the story by stating, "So I've never really worked under a script. I like to have some leeway. Like in a movie script, a guy goes into a room and fights all these guys. The storyboard guy is in there, and the stunt guys, and they figure out that scene, but it's hard to kind of write that kind of action in a script form. And if somebody did it for me, I'd probably get bored. I kind of like to have some sort of creative input in that respect." I think a lot of people think, for instance, if I understand, Alan Moore writes really complete scripts. He says, the guy's in the room, there's a can of Coke and some Cheerios and an open bag of Doritos, and there's a peppermint schnapps bottle on the floor, and a chihuahua's lapping up the blood from a guy's neck. But I don't think everybody writes like that. I know Frank never did. I mean, a lot of the stuff in the backgrounds I drew was just stuff I came up with. Like in Hardboiled in the last issue, he puts on a shirt, and the shirt he's wearing says Godzilla, and the old lady is wearing a shirt that says King Kong. And that's something I did because I thought it was funny. It's a collaboration. I don't think there's anything wrong, obviously, with the way that Alan Moore does it. I myself, I don't know that I could do it. The story follows Nixon, self-described as simply a tax collector. But at the same time, the book opens with a rampage that would make Frank Castle blush. Each of these beginning pages lays the foundation for the world, ridding itself of the need to inject expository dialogue, and instead to reward the reader for their attention to detail. We learn through these pages that Nixon works for Williford Home Appliances, a leading conglomerate vying for ownership of the capitalistic dystopia of Los Angeles. Well, that's an oxymoron. So let's just say LA in the future. As a result of the wrestling for power, each of the conglomerates hire their own contractors to carry out the corporate espionage in the most gruesome and repulsive means imaginable. The world we see is one that parodies the overindulgent culture of the late 80s, serving as a commentary on the growing influence of corporations. With this increased commodification of humanity, corporations begin to consolidate power through privatized ownership. During the time of doing research, I did come upon some reviews that said that the story fell victim to hyperbole. Some reviewers talked about the overindulgence of the obscene and lacking the nuance thereof to establish the foundation. And honestly, I couldn't disagree more. Hardboiled works as a narrative due to the visual density. Beneath the surface, there's a running through line of what makes us human, as an individual, within community, and within society. The world is one that regulates humanity to functions of consumption, bound by impulse and instinct. Whether it's violence or sex, humans devolved to their id, becoming over-reliant on technology. After ravaging downtown LA, Williford Home Appliances recovers Nixon to treat all of his various injuries. The scene is depicted as Geof Darrow is seemingly doing a riff of Barry Windsor Smith's pencils for Weapon X, but the difference is Nixon is hanging dong. Eggplant. Can I show this on YouTube? Come on, you gave it veins? I'm gonna get demonetized for this one. Oh well. The scene shows as a team of doctors work on Nixon, seemingly dissecting him only to rebuild him better, incorporating medical, mechanical, and a good dose of American chud. Nixon awakens to his wife and 2 children, with him in their bed wondering if the previous events were just a dream. Drifting back to sleep, Nixon relives the violence of the opening of the book. The facade drops when his wife seduces him, distracting him enough for his supposed children to sedate him with medication. This moment is interspliced with the operation of his repair taking place in the real world. Being fully subdued, Nixon has visions of a graveyard, where he stumbles upon an unmarked grave, seemingly tying the correlation between Nixon being a pawn for Williford Home Appliances to the US soldiers in Vietnam, with the underlying subtext being the pursuit of violence and control through the lens of peace, meaning that no matter the intentions of the individual, violence is used to serve the interest of capital owners. Nixon wakes up the next morning to a seemingly suburban life where he has no recollection of the day before. He bids his wife farewell, leaving for work, where Nixon then refers to himself as Carl Seltz, insurance investigator. This moment serves as the impetus for the ongoing fluctuations for Nixon, where his identity is constantly fluctuating from the bliss of the mundane to a bloodthirsty assassin, all dependent on the direction he's pointed by Williford. His struggle to retain his individuality continues into issue 2, with Nixon referring to himself as Harry Seltz, investigator for the Benevolent Assurance Corporation, and as Harry Burns, insurance investigator of 21 years. There's a moment where Nixon is trying to parse his thoughts during a drive when the cops are shown to be attempting to pull him over. But, of course, with everything being elevated, it doesn't go as expected. The police in this world are shown as early as the 2nd page of the 1st issue, completely retrofitted to be walking armories. And where they can't fit a gun, there's logos of some sort. Smash cut to the present, the police are operating mobile weapons of mass destruction, mowing down the cars in their way. Even their vehicles contain branding, similar to NASCAR vehicles for corporate sponsors. If we shift our focus to the real world, the NYPD's allocation for funding is cited to be $5.6 billion. Sorry, I don't know if you heard me, so let me just repeat myself. The New York Police Department's budget for 2025 is cited to be over $5.5 billion. With a B. To give this proper context, the NYPD's budget is equivalent to smaller countries' entire military budget. And at the same time, the NYPD has paid out over $250 million yearly to substantiated claims of misconduct by their officers. In 2024, there was a high-profile shooting of United Healthcare's CEO. I'm sure you heard about it. And with this overinflated budget, you would think that the NYPD was the one to capture the suspect. But it wasn't. It was a McDonald's employee that was hoping to cash in on the reward money for his proper identification. With this point, I just wanted to properly illustrate how the largest police department in the United States only rallied to utilize their full breadth of resources when it came to capital owners. The NYPD and other police departments in densely populated areas have these monumentally inflated budgets so they can serve the interest of capital. Okay, so back to the story. Nixon comes face to face with Blanche, depicted with the build of an archetypical grandmother, and seemingly another competitor's contractor with the mission to take him out. As Nixon attempts to free a little girl that Blanche has taken hostage, she begins planting the seeds of the truth behind his identity crisis. Nixon chases her into a heavily populated area of downtown LA as they trade gunshots, worry-free of the potential collateral damage that each causes. Nixon finally lands a shot on Blanche, making her lose her footing, causing her to trip into a gathering of motorcycles with their owners ready to attack her immediately. It's at this time that it's revealed as to why Blanche has been able to absorb the lethal attacks, displaying her to be an android. This moment isn't given any time for overcomplicated exposition, as the fight would logically continue to escalate until one murders the other. This fight sequence is the perfect example of the artistic capabilities of Geof Darrow and the restraint used by Frank Miller. Similar to the various cuts of Blade Runner, there are multiple avenues for when to incorporate the inner monologue / narration, and when to allow for the audience to gain the context of the narrative through what is being shown. Like stated before, Hard Boiled is a complicated reading experience, one that lends itself to multiple readings and emphasizing the importance of properly dissecting each page. The entirety of the series serves to be satirical elevation of the premise, exponentially inflating each of the instinctive aspects of humanity. It would be a disservice to only interact with these pages by the reading method of blank stares at bombastic moments. I've referred to the saying, the subtext is the text, multiple times on this channel, but it's a little bit different with this series. In Hard Boiled, we gain more of the nuances and storytelling through the art than any word on the page. A common barometer that I have for successful storytelling in art is if you strip the words away, can you still have the story conveyed back to you? Hard Boiled is the prime example of successes in that aspect. Once Nixon is able to make it out of the wave of destruction caused by himself and Blanche, we're finally greeted to the reveal that Nixon is also an android. I'm sure you didn't see that one coming, and funny enough, neither did Frank Miller. Geof Darrow said that he worked up most of the pages for issue 2, and once he heard back from Frank asked how any man could survive the onslaught and live. They decided for the narrative explanation for Nixon to be an android, so Miller would go back and retool the story for issue 1 so it can reflect properly. While there was only 3 months between issue 1 and issue 2, coming out September and December of 1990 respectively, issue 3 wouldn't see publication until March of 1992. The delay would obviously infuriate the fan base, with a lot of those letters being printed in issue 3 with the creative team responding. While this could be a death sentence for any other series, with Hard Boiled, I'm going to be honest, issue 3 is my favorite of the series, and issue 3 picks up with one of the most innovative illustration practices that transcends mediums. We see the confrontation of Nixon and Blanche, with the latter revealing to the former that they are both androids created by Williford Home Appliances. Blanche was the previous model of android that was created by Williford, but was discarded after she broke her installed programming. She wants to break Nixon outside of the control of Williford and teaming up with him to kill their creators. During this reveal, we see an 11-page sequence, starting off with 1 splash page and 9 full-page pieces following suit. The fascinating aspect is the use of camera movement over static images, with the background slowly shifting the placement of the characters comparatively to the junkyard. Darrow explained that he accomplished this look by first creating the full background of the junkyard in its own individual piece, and later transposing the two characters with slight alterations in their position within each of the pages. This technique pulls from his background in animation for Hanna-Barbera, utilizing cell animation practices to capture this effect. He says that he was also wanting to give himself a complex sequence for this scene so he could keep from being bored by standard illustrations. Upon the reveal from Blanche, Nixon rejects the possibility of him not being human, with him subsequently beating her to death. This is when Christy, the child Blanche had supposedly kidnapped, returns and laments of him causing the fall of their kind. She says that with Blanche now gone and Nixon not accepting his true self, that Williford will assuredly come after them. Immediately after, Christy is then murdered by a watchdog for Williford, who is literally a talking American bulldog that will accompany Nixon going forward. Nixon subsequently leaves the junkyard saying that he just needs to get home and get some sleep, in hopes of all of this just being a dream. They make their way to the subway station, with Nixon lackadaisically murdering everyone in his path. It's not until he's sitting on the train that he begins to acknowledge his inhumanity and questioning his motives. The watchdog explains that he is an asset from Williford, and it would be for the best if they went back to the company. Shifting perspectives, we see the level of annihilation Nixon leaves in his wake, with him returning to Williford and wiping out every living being in the headquarters. That is, until he's captured by the head of Williford. Nixon realizes that he's beat, and he makes a Hail Mary attempt to barter, asking to not be killed and in exchange to have his memory of everything wiped. We pick up with Nixon returning home, greeted by his wife, and showing that Nixon was given the opportunity to live in the ignorance of the outside world. If the end of the story sounds a little bit familiar, it's probably because this is the decision that's made by Neo in The Matrix. The Wachowskis were actually big fans of Hard Boiled, as well as the artistic vision of Geof Darrow. In the years following the publication of the series, the Wachowski sisters reached out to Geof Darrow to see if he would do concept art for their upcoming project that they wanted to do. It was a high-concept sci-fi film that hadn't gotten any takers from any of the studios, and they needed something to show as a visual aid to help those studios greenlight it. The film would blend the sensibilities of the cyberpunk genre along with the kung fu martial arts of John Woo. Geof Darrow would provide for the visual identity of The Matrix, and this would serve as the foundation for making elevated science fiction palatable to the modern audience. Geof Darrow would work with the Wachowskis for their future installments of The Matrix, and later returning to work with them on their adaptation of Speed Racer, aka the movie of all time. In the wake of The Matrix, each additional entry to Cyberpunk has paid homage to the film in some form or fashion, showing an increasing interest in utilizing Cyberpunk as the means to deconstruct philosophical questions of how human we truly are, given our dependence on technology on a societal level. The series would also be the primary inspiration for introducing hyperviolence and hypersexualization into the modern mainstream comic industry. And this unfortunately gave rise to the career of one Mark Miller, so I guess it's not without its flaws. Anyways, that's enough out of me. Once again, thank you so much to Karenzik and all of my supporters over on Patreon. Thanks for watching. Like the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And one last thing, go read some comics. Or else.